Well, last week I showed you how to draw a simple outline of a hornbill. This week we're going to paint it. This is an outline that you can download if you want to trace, or you can try sketching it, whichever works better for you, working from the picture or working from what I've already drawn. I'm working in ArtRage today because I wanted to do something that would give you a feel for how it might be if you drew in acrylic, or if you painted in acrylic or oil or something like that. It's probably more like acrylic than oil, but it has that kind of a feel. So I'm going to describe and walk through my process with you. And parts of it are going to be accelerated a little bit because this drawing took me about an hour and a half to do. But I want you to see the whole thing unfold, and I want to explain various parts as we go through. Again, I'll tell you what I'm doing digitally, and then I'll also try to give you some suggestions if you were maybe getting some acrylic paints out or some other kind of paint. As you can tell right now, what I'm doing is I'm just laying in a base coat, and that's what I tend to do when I do almost any kind of painting or drawing, whether it's with chalk or oils or whatever. I always lay down what's often called an underpainting, and that's what I'm doing here. I am working with, again, I already told you ArtRage, but I'm using the oil brush, and it really has a feel and look of oil paint. And that's one of the reasons I like it, because it actually even will tend to mix like oil paint on the surface, on the canvas, as you work with it. I'm just working with one color right now, but you can also set it so that it's somewhat like acrylic, where you can let it dry and you can work on a dry surface. So I've got kind of those options. But anyway, if you're following along or you're going to try to do this one, then you're going to want to take that one section and you want to come in with some kind of a base coat, some kind of an underpainting. Now, in a minute, once I've finished the larger black section of the bird, then I'm going to do something that I like to do when I'm doing digital painting. And if you watched the Rose video that I posted also with this activities page, then you will have already seen what I do is I work in layers, and I also use something called lock transparency, or sometimes it's called alpha lock, depending on the software you're using. But what I'm going to do in just a bit is I'm going to draw the next section, or paint the next section of the hornbill on a different layer. And I'll do that with pretty much each one of those separate sections that you see there that are drawn as individual shapes. And the reason I do that is because then it allows me, when I'm ready, to work on just that portion of the painting. Now, if you're working in traditional media, then you're not going to have that, that option. So, again, digital is a lot of fun if you want to try that. So it's just a suggestion. Again, I do a lot. Most of my art nowadays is digital art, and I'm learning more each time. So, okay, I've got the black section in. Now I'm going to work on the next. So what I'm doing is I'm creating a new layer, going down and adding a new layer, and then I'm going to start drawing on that. Now, I'm not turning on lock transparency at this point, but I do need the layer. What I just did there is some digital software allows you to grab a color from your reference photo, and I just picked up that white. I could have done it in the color picker, but this is just a lot faster. So I'm going to come in, but you notice that I've got three colors working there, and I decided not to have them on separate layers because I want to blend those a little bit more. So I'm laying in each one separately, and if I were working in, again, a traditional media, I would do the same thing here. I would come in with just the straight blue, the white, and then I'm going to go to yellow here in just a minute. And I will lay in a coat of yellow. See, I picked up, well, I didn't pick it up. I just didn't click and get the color I needed. So right now, again, I'm not worrying about details. I'm not worrying about trying to make it look real. I just want to get my base colors in. This is going to work about the same whether you're using oils or acrylics, or even if you're working in pastel. If you're working in watercolor, it would work a little bit differently. And this program imitates watercolor, and I want to do some watercolor style demos for you, but I need to play with the software a little bit before I can do that. See, I just created a new layer and put in the eye. The watercolor operates a little bit differently, and so I need to experiment with it before I try to do something for you here. Okay, I'm just coming in and putting in that little black section that is between the bill and the area around the bird's eye. I wanted to draw that as a separate little section. Okay, I've created another layer, and now there's a little blue portion. Now, sometimes I would have actually divided that up into two sections for the bottom and the top part of the bill, but this time I just decided to keep it all one, and I'll just draw on top of it later to show the division. Okay, just added another layer. This one's for the bottom bill, and I'm going to come in, and again, here I'm using a smaller brush. Now, it's the same brush, I just changed settings, but sometimes when you're working in traditional media with different areas, then you want to have a different, you want to have a selection of different size brushes to work with, so that you can work in tighter areas at times. Okay, adding one more layer, and this time it's going to be for the top bill. I'm doing it a little differently this time. I'm coming in actually with a lighter color. Coming in with kind of a light gray, because there's a lot of, if you look at that reference photo, there's a lot of sheen and a lot of kind of grayish tones in there. And I wanted to pick those up, but you'll see I still add a lot of black, and I could have probably started out with black and added the gray on top, but I decided instead to go the other way around, and then just mix the color on the canvas. So I'm coming in now with some of the black, and here in just a minute I'm going to switch tools, and I'll move away from a brush. I'm changing some of the brush settings here. It's one of the neat things about digital work in general, and this program in particular. ArtRage gives you a lot of control over your brush style, and all of them tend to do that, but I like ArtRage for how you can quickly adjust and change very specific parts of the brush settings. Okay, coming in again, and actually at this point I have turned on alpha lock or lock transparency, so that I can blend here, because when I try to blend a section like that and I don't have alpha lock on, then I can end up painting in areas I don't really want to. So that's again another advantage of working in digital format. And so just moving along here and trying to, as best I can, to approximate that look. I'm not going to try to duplicate it perfectly. This is a painting and not a photograph. And now there are some amazing artists that do total photorealism in their artwork, and I like a realistic look. And you'll see in some of my work it is quite sharp and detailed at times, but I also appreciate at times more of a painterly look. So we're kind of going for that this time around. Just adding in a little lighter color here, kind of a lighter gray, and still going to try to come in and blend. Part of what I'm doing here too is I'm experimenting with some of the brushes to see what kind of effect I get. I work with ArtRage a lot, but I tend to do it on my iPad, and it's a little different on my iPad than it is here on a desktop computer. And so at times I have to experiment around a little bit to find out what's going to work best and create the best look. So I hope you're trying to paint along or draw along, or at least that you want to. I'm about to switch to my palette knife. Palette knife painting is a lot of fun, and if you're working in acrylic or oil, I'd encourage you to try a little bit of it to just use the flat edge of a knife or the flat surface of a knife to blend some of your paints. It gives you a totally different look, and it's really a lot of fun. So I have blended that out for now, and still working there. I'm going to switch layers now, and now I'm going to start working on the bottom part of the bill, and I am still working with my palette knife. And what happened right there was for some reason the palette knife tool wasn't working right until I added a little bit of paint to the bottom of the bill, and that's why that worked like that. Anytime I go over to that picture, I'm just picking up some color and trying to adjust just a little bit, trying a different setting on the brush, see what I get, and picking up some of those colors to try to not have it just a pure black. Okay, going to change layers now. And start working on that section of blue right there at the end of the bill. And I'm going in and at this point using the color picker to try to adjust the color a little bit and get it just a little bit darker. And then I want to add in a little bit of that white, because again, if you look at the reference photo, there's kind of a sheen around there. It's kind of a curvy area. It's picking up the light, and it also shows up at the place where the bill, the top and the bottom parts of the bill divide. And then I'm going to go in and I'm just going to add a little black line in there to show the division. And then I'm going to go to another layer, turn on alpha lock, and I'm going to try to get a feather effect with my bird. And again, you'll see I'm trying 2 or 3 different tools here. This one is kind of a wet. I'm still with a palette knife, but it's sort of it would be as if you added a lot of liquid to your paint, and you can see right there it's not looking too good. Again, that's one of the things I really love about doing digital work, because you do have undo. So if you make a mistake, you can just reverse it. And so I've switched to a different kind of look with the palette knife, and now I am, in fact, I think I'm back to a regular brush, and I'm painting in with a slightly different shade, a very, very kind of a charcoal gray is what I would call it. If you look at the reference photo, you see, and all that is where the light is hitting the bird's feathers. So I'm just kind of throwing those in there. One of the things that I don't particularly like about this software is it's not, at least I haven't found out how to get really fine detail yet. Suppose I could have with this picture, but it would have taken a lot more time, and I wanted to try to get this out for you this week. So again, like the rose picture I took over 8 hours. This one took me about an hour and a half to do. Okay, so I am getting a little kind of a feathery look. I'm going to trim that down. He needs a haircut, or maybe you call it a feather cut. Gonna add that back in and just carry him off the edge of the page. Not always something that you want to do, but I want to get that, that feel that his feathers are perking up and maybe he's alert. Okay, I've switched brushes again. This one just adds little daubs of paint, very short, and so it gives me more of a feather look, but I'm going to come back in and I'm going to try to smooth some of that out because it's a little bit too stark. So we'll work on that for just a minute or two. So if you're doing this at home, again, you're going to lay in your base coat. You're going to come in with really a second wave is what I call it, where I begin to kind of lay in and put down a second level of detail. Again, it's not what I would consider my final detail. Like here, what I'm going to begin to do is shape that blue area and the white, but then I'm also going to begin to blend those colors so that they are not just really stark. So if you're working in oils, that's really easy to do. With acrylics, you got to be careful that your paint hasn't dried on you. I don't work much with acrylic, and I really don't work a lot with oils much anymore. I used to work a lot with oils until our kids came along, and then the mess was just a little bit too much. So I decided to gravitate to watercolors and chalks and things that were a little easier to clean up than oil paint. We're moving along, and at this point I'm back with the palette knife and still trying to find a good way to blend without over blending. I kind of like some of that middle transition there. And I'm just smoothing out a little bit here, using the palette knife to smooth it down. And then I'm going to add in, I picked up a little of that brown, because if you look at the bird's breast, it's definitely got a brownish tint to it. So I'm trying to add a little bit of that in. Again, with the oil brush, it's going to mix in, and so you need to take that into account. I'm trying to use airbrush here right now, which I really like to use airbrush a lot, but at times you have to be careful because it tends to remove paint from the edges of the section if you've got lock transparency on. So I have to be a little bit more careful. But I like airbrush because sometimes I can lay in some just soft color that I can then later blend, and that's what I'm doing now. I've got the color in and I want to just kind of blend it around. Every now and then I save my work. That's the finished work. So that's where we're going. That wasn't actually supposed to be in there. That just, I imported it and it ended up going between some of the clips. I did this painting in 3 phases, and each one was about 20 minutes long, and then I saved the actual final version, and in my video editing software I imported that back in, and I ended up with a photo that wasn't where it was supposed to be, but that's okay. You got a preview. Come in, again, if you look at the reference photo, there's kind of a nice feathering into the black, and haven't quite mastered how to do that yet with ArtRage. So that's something I'll be working on. And just kind of coming around because there's a little bit of black showing underneath that yellow, and I want to kind of get that out of there. Okay, this is the final phase, if you will, of the process, and I'm just adding in, again, not what I would call fine detail, but what I want to do is add that third layer of detail. The more I would come in, if I were to take more time with this, then I could add in a lot more detail. But I'm going to stop at about 3 passes this time around. Okay, adding some gray in up around the eye, and in just a bit I'm going to start adding some of that detail around the eye. If you look at the reference photo, then you're going to see the kind of some wrinkled skin, I guess you would call it, around the bird's eye. So we're going to go there in a minute, and I'm going to work on getting a very fine brush for that. And I'm going to pick up some of that darker blue and just sketch in around the eye and try to add that wrinkle. Now, I talk a lot about contour drawing and how that's the best exercise that you can really do in learning how to draw what you see, and this is a good illustration of it. What I do is I look at that reference photo, and whether I'm painting or whether I'm drawing, that's pretty much the focus of my attention. I do look at the painting that I'm actually doing, but a lot of my gaze is on the reference. And so again, if you're looking for an exercise to really help you draw, then what you want to do is just get some household object, put it down on a table in a position where you have to turn your head away from your paper to be able to see it, and then draw the object without looking at your paper. And you will find if you do that, it will make a huge difference in your ability to draw. It's a very simple exercise, but it's kind of like boot camp. That's like doing your push-ups. Adding a few little dots and details into the eye so we have a little bit of a reflection there. And what I'm doing at this point is I'm removing some layers because I don't want those original drawing layers to stay in there. And then the last thing I do is I go back in, I turn lock transparency off, but what I want to do is there are a lot of little gaps, a lot of little places where paint didn't actually touch the surface, as it were. And so where that brown background is showing through, I want to go in and clean that up and just kind of make it nice and neat before I wrap this painting up. So as I'm doing those last details, how would you do this if you were working in your own media? Again, acrylics, you could probably copy this pretty closely. If you worked in pastels, then I would come in with, again, my base layers, my base colors, and then build on top of those. You could even try drawing this just in black and white or with colored pencils. Each medium is a little different, and so you have to experiment with the one that you like and see what one works best for you. Now I'm going to come in and add a few. If you look at the reference picture, then you know the bird's bill has kind of some squiggly lines, almost like marble. And so I'm just throwing a few of those in there. And we're just about done. One of the last things that I do, once I have finished cleaning it all up, is I'm going to merge all of those layers into one. What I'm doing there, I guess, is adding a few little extra details on the front of the bird's feathers just to make that a little bit better. Okay, going to go up and work in the blue again. I thought I was done. As you can obviously tell, I already recorded this, and I'm just doing a voiceover, and that's just because otherwise you'd have to watch me draw for an hour and a half, and that might be a little tedious. Probably a little tedious watching just for half an hour. But I hope that you will maybe get inspired by this to try doing this bird. It's a lot of fun. It is time consuming, but it's not, it's not that difficult. Just take your time, break it down into sections, and then add your color, and come back with a second layer of detail and then a third layer of detail. Well, I have one more thing to do, and this is something that you always want to do with your art. Just saved it. That's very important for digital art. But one thing that you want to do with your art is always sign it. So what I'm going to do is a little trick in digital art. I'm going to add a new layer, and then I'm going to add my signature, and I'm going to do it really big. Now, normally I wouldn't sign a picture that big or put that big of a signature, but again, with digital art, I can select it and I can shrink it and reposition it and get it down to a reasonable size, and there I'm done. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this, and I've sure enjoyed painting it for you. I hope you'll give it a try yourself, and then we'll try some other painting exercise next week. So until next time, thanks for watching. I'm Jim Pence with See the Light.